Okay, I think we're live. We are. Good morning, everyone. It's a little bit of a challenge getting on this morning, but that's the way it is sometimes. We are here with the beautiful Tara Rose, who's coming to us from California in America. What time is it over there?
Good question. It's 1:43
Oh,
p.m.
that's
Yeah.
not that bad.
Oh.
Lunchtime. Yeah. That's awesome. So, Tara, we're going to be talking about shadow work. Obviously, it's something that is part of the sort of work that you do when you're working with people. And you're just, can you just tell us a little bit about what sort of work you do?
Yeah. So I'm actually an intuition and shadow work coach. So I work with intuitive spiritualists, which is the whole, like, basically if you're into the esoteric, then I'm usually working with you on helping you develop your deep intuitive skills, as well as helping you honor and integrate your shadows, so that this way you could fully and authentically step into your soul's energetic mission.
Ah, awesome. Awesome. I bet the type of work you've had some interesting. How long have you been working like that?
Yeah, so I've been in the coaching space for about 3 years now. I actually started as a health coach. I've been doing shadow work and intuition development specifically for the past year now.
Okay, awesome. And just knowing that sort of work, I'm sure that you've got some interesting stories as well. So,
Yeah,
and
some funny,
oh yeah,
interesting stories. Yeah.
yeah, um, because like there's a lot to that sort of world, right? There's a lot of interesting aspects, and it's interesting that we're talking about shadow work because I'm down. If for those that know me, I'm actually not at home, and that's why the unusual background. I'm at a friend's house down 3 hours from where I live, down at a beach called Mollymook, which is down south from where I live in Sydney. And so I've been talking to the friend that I'm staying with and about the dark side because he's new to like spirituality in a way. And I was talking about how you really need to embrace that aspect of yourself if you're really going to find your true power and true essence, right? You've got to embrace all of it. So what are your thoughts on how, what is it that you find when you're working with people?
Yeah, so in terms of like why I got into shadow work, it's obviously not the best story, right? People that are working with darkness probably experience some level of darkness in their life. So for me, that was after my mom had passed away unexpectedly in 2018. I got diagnosed with PTSD, and I kind of like was in this position of like I literally don't understand the meaning of life or what it is that I'm supposed to be doing on this planet, or literally how I'm supposed to like continue on with all this pain that I'm currently experiencing. And I identified already kind of within the spiritual community. I had people that I looked up to, and thankfully like I was in a position where I like reached out to them and I was like, hey, like I how do I like move through this time that I'm currently experiencing right now? And nobody had a really great answer for me. Everybody was just kind of like, it'll get better with time. Like my favorite was, what can you learn from the situation? um Basically like, every wrong thing that you could say to a person was said to me with like full like, the intention was in the right place, right? Like they were obviously trying to help, but there was just this clear like bypassing of like, well, you can't stay in this darkness, you need to like find your way back into this lightness, into the back of, the law of attraction, because if your vibrations are low, then you're bringing more negativity into your life. And it was basically like that I was causing myself to
Yeah,
feel more
and it was
depressed or
wrong. Yeah, it was
yeah.
wrong. And yeah.
And I couldn't get through my grief. I sat in this space and I felt like a duck, like waiting for my life to start. Like I just felt like I was sitting there and I was like, I'm waiting for a year to pass. Like that was like how I felt. I was like, after a year apparently it's going to start getting better, so maybe I just need to wait out the year. That's what I
Mm.
did. So I just kind of sat there And I just waited I kind of like just let life kind of pass me for a really long time, literally a whole year. And a year started coming up, and guess what? I didn't feel any better.
Yeah, you were waiting for this end point. Yeah,
I don't know. Like, everyone made it seem like after a year that somehow everything was just going to feel better because it was going to quote unquote feel more normal. You know, like the first holidays, the first everything was now experienced. But I didn't feel any better. I didn't feel like going through everything a second time was going to make me feel any better about the fact that I still had to go through these things. So I realized that in order for me to actually get better from my grieving, I need to allow myself to grieve. I needed to allow myself to kind of sit into the space. And once I allowed myself to relinquish the guilt associated with like feeling the feelings that I was, and allowed myself to really feel into my grief, and to be honest, like from an outside perspective, it probably seemed counterintuitive, but like, you know, when you're organizing a room and then like the room looks even more messy, like when you're trying to organize it, like that's kind of
before it gets to the end result.
You have to take everything out of the drawer so this way you can put everything nice. Like that's kind of what it was like, where it was like I almost had to regress and be even worse before I could get better, because I just needed to create the space where it was okay for me to be in whatever state of mind and health that I was in. And like obviously there's lines to this, right? Like staying mentally well, making sure that I'm not doing anything that's literally going to harm myself. Very important, being very clear about that here. But I needed to give myself the permission to just like cry a lot and like sit in this really dark space. So after I started feeling into this like, you know, new experience of literally like my depression, because I've always had depression, but I always, you know, like just tried to like shove it down or whatever. I found my intuition mentor, and I started developing myself as an intuitive. And I got into it because I don't know, like weird life synchronicities, right? 2 months before my mom unexpectedly passed away, I made a post on my Instagram that was like, hey, I remember that I have a connection with spirit. And what I meant by that was, hey, I remember I could talk to dead people when I was really little, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing that out loud. So I was like, I think that I have this connection. And then like she reached out to me, like I was following her for a really long time. She reached out to me. She's like, hey, you know, I'm starting this program on like intuition development. Like, would you like be down for that? I'm like, whatever, I have nothing to lose, you know, like that's fine. I trust you. Like, what's the worst that happens? Nothing happens. I don't have anything else going on for me right now. And I really think that I was able to really heal myself, like doing that intuitive work, right? It was through understanding my own gifts that I was able to, oh my God, like so much changed for me. I was able to have that relationship with my mom in spirit, as well as, you know, really hone in on like the shadow work aspect of things, of when I'm supporting people, like having that like guidance from their ancestors, from their loved ones in spirit, and help them develop their own gifts so that they could continue that relationship on their own.
Yeah. And so when you talk about shadow work for someone that, you know, you've given us your experience of being, you know, on that edges, you know, with grief and depression, and you know, those parts are the shadow self, right? They're the part of us that needs to be seen and experienced, you know, like, and not be, you know, shunned, because when we're going through something like that, you know, especially with someone that we love, and you know, if it was sudden, it's such a shock to our energetic field as well. If you're were you already in that intuitive side already? Like, were you already working with people? You weren't, okay, but you were talking to people, and there was no one that was saying it's okay, like there was no one saying that it's okay for you to be going, like, just acknowledge it. Wow, that's yeah. So if you was, if you know, like there's people watching, women watching today, what would you say would be shadow work that, you know, you've experienced, that you've been working with people with, other than, like, you know, there's grief and there's depression, but is there anything else that how would you explain shadow work to people?
Okay, wait, so that's two different questions. So in terms of explaining shadow work, so let's start there. So if you have no idea what shadow work is, totally fine. That half of my job is explaining what shadow work is. I'm basically convinced of that at this point. So shadow work is it's coined by psychologist Carl Jung in the 1930s. So it is a tool that like clinical psychologists still use to this day in order to help their clients working through certain aspects of their life. So the definition of shadow work, like from psychology, is that the shadow is anything that we repress or ignore in ourselves. So typically this is really spoken about in terms of like our shame, our grief, our anger, emotions that we typically think, and know kind of consciously that we are constantly repressing or ignoring. My favorite aspect of my work, though, is that the darkness is not the only thing that we're repressing or ignoring. So I kind of think about it like emotions. I have depression, so it's a really great analogy for me. I don't have a better one, but when you have depression, you could either have all of your emotions or you could kind of flip a switch and all of them are off. But you cannot pick which emotions you are going to have. Like you can't be like, I'm only gonna have happiness, but I'm just gonna like turn off all these other ones. Like it obviously it's just not really how that works. It's the same thing with our light and our darkness. The more darkness that you're repressing, the more light that you are repressing in your life too. So the beautiful thing about doing this work is that people are uncovering the things that are making them uncomfortable and sitting in these spaces where they're able to express their emotions more clearly. But as a result of doing that, then they're able to step into their light more often, especially since I hold the title of shadow work coach. More likely than not, people are already interested in shadow work when they start working with me, and they've maybe even tried doing some shadow work on their own. We could have a whole conversation about that. But at the end of the day, like what people are really afraid of isn't their darkness. What people are really afraid of is their light. People are really afraid to
Mm.
stand out. They're really afraid to show up as their true and authentic self. So I really take the approach with a lot of my clients where it's like, well, what are your goals? What are you trying to work on? And then while we're trying to help you step into your life, that's where the shadows start coming up for you, and that's where the work kind of begins.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite poems is the Marianne Williamson's "It's not our darkness, but our light." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful poem, and so you know, it's so true, right? When we're discovering our who we are and discovering our light, it's more likely that our darkness will show up just naturally
Right.
with doubt and fear and all of those things and all of those aspects. And so many of us have had previous experiences, whether we're aware of them, different timelines is a better way than if you don't believe in past lives and stuff like that, different timelines is a good way of putting it, of being repressed unconsciously, whether we're aware of it or not. When we do shine our magic, like when we, experience ourselves as powerful women or, intuitives, then even today, there's still sort of aspects of society that um, can judge and really ridicule you for that type of work, right? Do you have you had the experience of women experiencing that?
Yeah, so I really, in my work, I kind of believe that shadow work kind of has this dual purpose, right? You have like the strict science and psychology when it comes to shadow work. When that's the case, the shadow is stemming from something in this lifetime, in our specifically, usually within our childhood to some capacity.
Mm,
However, the beautiful thing about doing the spiritual work is that the people that I work with have the understanding that there's also more than just this physical lifetime that we're experiencing, and that's coming up for us. So that's where like the spiritual side of shadow work kind of comes in, where it's like things that you are experiencing might not be yours and they might be holding you back or unconscious, not because of something that you physically experience, but because of something that is being handed down to you, either through your ancestors or either through a past life that is showing up for you so that you could heal it. Because when you heal
mm,
it, you also heal that aspect of your past as well.
mm,
I've actually been doing a lot of work right now in terms of helping people understand ancestral healing, and also I'm starting to like even dabble in my own past life regression, like being able to facilitate past life regression, because right now I kind of like what's the word, I usually like tell somebody to go to somebody else specifically for that because I'm not trained right now in that. But it's so linked to my work, so that's why I'm trying to make sure that I could facilitate it in a very safe manner. I would never do anything to my clients that would put them in a situation, especially. And have you done a past life regression before?
I've actually do what I call multidimensional healing now, but I did I did 7 years. I'm in a woman's book, so I did 7 years of past life regression on, like, I was the client,
Oh, okay.
um, for 7 years, really full on. I'm in her book, and then I facilitate past life regression, but I've actually morphed it into what I call multidimensional healing, because so much more than past lives come up in people's space. So I've done past life regressions for nearly 20 years now. So
Oh, okay. So you're a
yeah.
seasoned pro. In any case, basically, like I know, like when I'm in that space, like you're literally having an out of body experience. So you want to be
Mm,
really careful with like helping people in the astral plane. I had somebody tell me that they tried doing like a YouTube past life regression and like they got like stuck. They like couldn't
yeah.
find their body back. And I was like, we're gonna make sure that we're doing this right, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I once worked on a woman, a friend of mine, that's from England, way back when I was just starting out, and she went back over to England and thought, well, I worked, like, I can see how Elizabeth took me through that. I'm going to do it on myself. And she messages me, because it was before, Facebook, and I think I can't remember how she got in contact with me. I think it was email or something. And she said, I went to this blue planet, and now everything's blue. I've got this like blue tinge in my, like, everything. When I'm walking down the street, like, everything's blue. What did I do? And I said, well, first of all, you don't do it on yourself. Like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I had to sort of go in and take her, bring her back, like, fix it up. And I said, don't ever do it on yourself, because, like, I've had a lot of training to do this.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
a it's
Same
a
thing
big
with
thing.
shadow work. Same thing with shadow work. I feel like a lot of people, because, we live in the age of technology, like all of the information is out there, and I don't pretend
Mm,
that like anything that I do, like the information itself exists somewhere at a minimum in a combination of different resources that I've compiled in a way that's intuitive for me and my clients, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
the thing is that when people try to do these things on their own, especially going back to YouTube, I've seen like a part like my clients like trying to do like shadow work prompts on YouTube, and they come to me and they're like, I'm depressed. I like have no will
Traumatized.
morning. Yeah, like they're exhausted. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I was like, they were like, I looked at a picture of myself and I told my younger self everything that I hate about myself. And I'm like, why
Did
would you do that? What's the motivation? They're like, I don't know. I thought this was what I was supposed to do. I'm like, what is the goal here? I was like, are you
Yeah.
trying? Like, why would you? Like, of course
Are
you're not
you
gonna
re-traumatizing yourself, right? Yeah.
right, and that's exactly it. Like, literally, so like that's like my new tagline: shadow work without re-traumatizing yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, it all comes back to the intention. Why are you trying to do this work? Why are you trying to do shadow work? What are you trying to work on? It's usually like, I'm trying to have better relationships with myself and with people around me. I'm trying to like work to being the best version of myself, like whatever it is that comes up for people. But like, if you feel miserable in the process, then like what is that? Then you're not reaching your goal, right? Like then you're just making yourself miserable for the sake of making yourself miserable. And
Yeah.
that's and then it becomes my job, instead of actually helping them understand their shadow work, then it's like I have to undo all of this like re-trauma
Unravel it.
they put on themselves. And then my work isn't as like we can't progress as far during our time together, because half of that time is spent like undoing
Yeah.
like the you know the thing with shadow work is that, especially like when you're not doing it from a place of like, I'm just grieving and I'm trying to like work through that, like if you're in a space of like I'm just trying to like work on myself, if you already have like thought patterns that are not serving you, if you're going into this space, then like those thought patterns are only going to amplify themselves, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
when I'm working with people, it's really, that's why it's like a combination of doing like light and shadow work together, because it's like you need to like have a frame of reference for what your mindset should look like, and a healthy way to reframe your thoughts, so that when these thoughts come up for you when you have to inevitably deal with, oh my gosh, like I did this thing in my past that I don't particularly love. Natural, human, yes.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you like bury yourself, you know, into a hole because of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's really like where this shadow work comes in. It's about really taking the unconscious patterns and making them more light, being more intentional about where our thoughts are coming from, so that this way we could actually begin to move forward towards what it is that we actually want in life.
Yeah, I really love that because, you know, to have that end result, like have a framework and a structure of, well, this is who we are.
Right.
And yes, this is an aspect of who we are, and we're going to look at that aspect of who we are, but we're moving towards who we are as the light, like, and yes, just acknowledging all those other aspects that are in us, but this is who we are, this is our natural state, and keeping them focused on that. That's so beautiful, because it's so important not to just, as you said, there's so much out there on YouTube, right, that it can be dangerous for people that are dabbling in things that they don't know what they're doing, and getting things for free. And
Right.
it's really important to have someone. I've only just in the last 12 months myself, maybe actually 18 months, um, had the realization of how important it is to find a mentor or a coach or someone that's been where you're been, and moved out of that and moved into a different place, and got success with it, and like is in a place where you want to achieve. So it's actually a really important part of our journey, is to have someone that can facilitate you moving forward, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that it's really important just to getting the guidance and support in order to help make sure that you're doing things in a very safe manner, and that inevitably will help you reach your unique goals, because prompts are great, but and like maybe that example that I gave is helpful for somebody in
Mm,
particular, but
mm,
just for somebody randomly, like that's not necessarily going to actually serve them. And that's
mm,
really what it comes back to, is just like, why is this work important to you? Why are you attracted to it? And what are your goals, and how does it actually line up with even doing this work? Because sometimes like the shadow work kind of comes as like more like, just typical mindset work, but it's not necessarily having to do all this deep conditioning. It just depends on the specific person and what their background is like, and what it is that they've experienced. I've had, some clients that, like I said, like they don't necessarily need a whole lot of like really deep shadow work, but some of them come in with a lot of different trauma and a lot of different backgrounds that is impacting their ability to move forward. And that's really where that work kind of starts and begins. So I always tell people, if you're like, this is another like frequently asked question. All right, I'm interested in shadow work. Where do I start? Right? Like, so I always say to start in two different places. The first place is in a goal that you cannot reach, or you can reach it, but then you fall off of it and it's cyclic. So an example that I like to give for that is like when you're losing weight and you're like, I'm trying to lose weight, but the weight isn't coming off, or you inevitably hit your goal weight, but then you gain it all back. So
mm,
that's really
mm.
a great place to show that there's some sort of shadow that's kind of hiding there, that's keeping you where it is that you currently were at. The other place is in projections and conversations with other people. Because the shadow is unconscious by definition, that means that the place where it's going to come out to play is in the reflections of other people and what it is that we're experiencing. So, a really great way to know that if you're getting angry with somebody, if it's a shadow or if it's not, right? Because sometimes people are just annoying. That's okay too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Because like
true.
that's the other part of it, right? Like you don't want to like over analyze literally everything. And I have like sometimes they're like, well, is this a shadow or am I a shadow? Is this shadow or my shadow? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah. Drives you crazy, right?
yeah, like we don't have to. It's not that complicated. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but like if it's a behavior that's annoying and it's not based off of the person that's completing that action, then that's a shadow. So for example, I used to get very annoyed when people were late. If I like had like an appointment, or if I was supposed to meet up with a friend at a diner at 8:30 and it's like 8:40 and they're still not around, I used to be furious with them. But it didn't matter if like that was like one friend, my cousin, my sister, like it didn't matter who it was. That behavior itself annoyed me, right? And then that's the place where a shadow is. So in this
Mm-hmm.
particular example, it was because I would get mad at myself when I was late for things.
Yeah.
And I'm late for other things, then I feel like I'm disrespecting other people's time. So I'm getting mad at them for something that I'm really mad about myself over. Because do I feel like they're disrespecting my time in that moment? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm concerned about that for other people. I'm like angry that they're not as like, why aren't they freaking out that like they're not feeling like they're disrespecting my time?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
And
really,
obviously that comes back to something from your childhood somewhere, or like,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So
That's
they're the sort of
the
things.
starting point. Then the actual shadow work is basically uncovering why. That's the difference between working with like a mindset limiting belief coach and working with a shadow work coach, in my opinion, is that a limiting belief in itself is just like, this is the thought that I'm having, and you're trying to just work with that thought. Versus shadow work is really about uncovering why these thoughts are happening, really getting to the core of that understanding, so that this way it doesn't change anything. People think that once they get to the core of it, they're just like, why isn't the shadow healed? And it's like, no. The idea is that now you're conscious of it. Now you have to use intentional and mindful living in order to now be aware when this thought is coming up for you again, so that you can move past it, because you know that it's not really your own. But it doesn't
Mm,
change the fact that the thought is going to happen. And the more often that you're able to move past that like little voice in your head that's telling you X, Y, and Z, the more that that thought just isn't going to come up as often, if maybe at
mm,
all. Some shadows can be completely transmuted and healed, and some are going to be there to stay. And that's just,
mm,
the way that things are, especially in business. It doesn't matter at any stage that you're growing and building, some other thought, limiting belief or whatever is going to inevitably come up for you. It literally does not
yes.
matter. If anything I've learned, doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, doesn't matter. Like it's like one of those things, people are like, well, do you feel like maybe you will be less hard on yourself like when you're like making a lot more money? Like, something tells me no, I don't feel like it matters, and I'm just going to accept that that's the case now. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
It's definitely, like part of our evolution, right? That we're going to have different things come up as we go along, like, and to acknowledge it, as you were saying, acknowledge that this is the way it is. And the more you do, the more like it, the very acknowledgement is, in my opinion, 70 to 80% of the work. Like, and as you said, like the charge is not there anymore once you acknowledge it. Like you tend to, oh, okay, and you can work through it in whatever way. So Tara, lovely to chat with you. It's been awesome. Um, if people wanted to find out more, we've put a little bit of a bio in our promo for when we were talking, but could you go in and add some information in the comments? Um, how does someone get in contact with you? They could
Yeah.
just get onto you through Facebook.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways. You could follow me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Tara Red Robin. I also have a Facebook group called Shadow Work and Intuition. I'll drop that in the comments as well. And I would love to, I'll also drop it in the comments, but I have a free ultimate guide to shadow work. So I'll also drop that in the description for anybody that's interested in maybe getting started on some shadow work, and getting kind of, my perspective on shadow work in a way that is safe.
Yeah, that's awesome. Excellent. Oh, thank you for sharing that. It's
Thank you so
lovely
much.
to talk to you.
Yes, it was lovely to be here. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I loved this is, the sort of stuff that a lot of women in here would be interested in, because it's important for us, as we was talking at the start, it's important for us to accept and acknowledge and understand our shadow if we're going to be, you know, accepting and understanding and working in our light. So it's very
Yeah.
important work.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, hun.
Bye, you too.